Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, November 27th, 2024, and today we are talking about lo-fi winter farming. We get a question about the loneliness of farming, and we'll continue Seed Week with Dan Brisebois, who will join the show to guide us in how to breed seeds for what we specifically want. So let's do it. All right, so quick reminder that I will not be doing an episode tomorrow as I will be spending time with my family, prepping for Turkey Sandwich Weekend and doing some neglected farm stuff. Specifically, farm-wise, I am starting to tighten up the gardens a bit in preparation for a cold snap this weekend. We're finally going to get a few hard freezes, and they're quite welcomed. I have no idea, though, how well the lettuces are going to make it through because they have not been hardened off very well, as they normally would be at this point. It's been basically t-shirt weather since they've been in the ground, and now, surprise, freeze. But I'm not sweating it, and that's not a dad pun. I just mean that lettuce is incredibly stubborn, and it will survive a lot of cold. It is always amazing to me how we can, with a little row cover and unheated high tonal space, convince lettuce to produce pretty much all winter. In the dead of winter, we can make it through 0-degree temperatures, which is like -12 to -17 Celsius. And so long as we do the little steps right, the lettuce makes it through that. What are those little steps? So what I'm doing this week to prepare the lettuce for this cold snap is that I'm first putting 9-gauge wire hoops. Basically, I buy spools of 9-gauge wire from Tractor Supply and cut that into hoops. And I use those to keep the row cover from touching the lettuce. Experienced growers know, and inexperienced growers will learn quickly, that if row cover is touching a crop when it freezes, like when it freezes outside, the row cover will burn the leaves, which is not great. Then, before I get the row cover out, I'm putting the weights down that will hold it. So like I'm putting those down first. After that, I'm laying the row cover out next to the lettuce so that when the time comes, I can just pull the row cover over top of the lettuce at the end of the day, shut the sides of the tunnel, and then walk away for the night. The next day, I will wait until the sun is up and the tunnel is beginning to warm. I will remove the row cover when it's unfrozen enough to do so, to give the plants air and as much sunlight as possible. If it is not going below 28 degrees, and sometimes all the way down to 25, I won't bother with the row cover. But if it's going to be anywhere near that, I usually do throw the row cover over. And the reason that I push it that far is for us, it is more often than not a lack of ventilation and not the cold that kills the plants in the winter. That is to say, fungal diseases in particular proliferate in poor ventilation. So ventilation is key. You don't want to cover them any more than you have to. If it's around or above freezing outside, I will open the sides of the tunnel in the morning, like once the sun has come up. If not, I may just leave the doors on the ends open until it warms up a bit more outside. I also have the most luxurious element on my Rimmel high tunnel called a ridge vent, which I can open to release hot air out of the top and provide a little ventilation. Picture a pop-up sunroof on a car, but on a high tunnel, where basically I pull a chain and it opens up a big vent right out of the middle of the tunnel. Ridge vents are not cheap, but I love our ridge vent. I don't want to imagine this particular large tunnel without one. In the summer, the ability to open the top of our tunnel turns our entire tunnel into a shade house because the excess heat is so easily released and the plastic provides a small amount of shade. In the winter, it can release stagnant air without exposing the plants to too intensive of cold. Obviously, the ideal is to have all of this stuff automated in ventilation fans and even a furnace. But I like how low budget and low-fi my setup is, especially because it just works. I can, when I feel so inspired, grow lettuce, kale, spinach, and arugula all winter, then start my cares in January with no real issues. Would it be more productive and less labor intensive if I had some sort of heating and automation? Oh, yeah, 100%, sure. But balancing those costs with profitability can be difficult depending on your markets and what you're growing. And because we don't go or grow that hard at the winter, it's not something we would be able to justify financially. And again, lettuce is amazing and we'll get through the winter mostly fine, especially if it's had a period to kind of harden off. Now, doing this in a field without a tunnel is a little more complicated and challenging, not only for the amount of cold, but the wind will wear out any coverings you use, especially when they're in like tunnel form. If you're hoping to get your field crops longer into the winter, you will need more covering and pretty much never uncover it except to harvest. You need to passively warm the soil below the plants. This is one of the ways in which tunnels help get you deeper into the winter. The soil is in the tunnel is warmer and therefore offers more radiant heat. The plastic itself is not a great insulator, so the air temperatures inside of the tunnel are basically the same indoors as they are outside on a cloudy day or at night. But it's that heat from the ground that really makes the difference. So if you can encourage some sort of heat trapping in the field in certain beds as much as possible, that will make a difference in terms of how long you can have crops out in the field and be productive. There are also perforated plastics that can make for what we call low tunnels in the field, but I don't have any experience with those perforated plastics, and most of my experience with low tunnels that are more than a foot or two high have been ultimately thwarted by wind. Brian O'Hara discusses using perforated polytunnels in his book, which I will link in the show notes. And Neversink Tools has started to sell perforated and low tunnel plastics, which you can check out as well. Again, I'll link all of that in the show notes. Not a recommendation per se. I don't personally have any experience with them, like I said, but I'd love to hear in the comments from people who do. Anyway, wish my lettuces luck this weekend, but for now, let's get a question from our Patreon members on farm loneliness. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and would like to support it, you can do so over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon member questions. Today's question is an important one from Patreon member Dreamland Farmstead, who writes, quote, I quit my full-time HR job in August to farm full-time, diversified veg and hens for eggs. This was our 7th season, but first time with a 25-member CSA and one farmer's market, planning expansion next year. Going from a desk job to farming full-time has been awesome. I'm so much happier, but the biggest challenge is that I'm lonely. In the field all day by myself, and I miss interacting with people. My husband pops out from his office occasionally to say hi. I talk to my sisters and friends on the phone. Listening to podcasts like this one is a huge help too, and I get out at night with the kids' activities, but I really do miss just being around people during the day. Any thoughts on how to feel less lonely while working solo all day? Thank you, and sorry for the book. Carolyn. End quote. Okay, well, thank you, Carolyn, and obviously no worries about the long questions. I like questions like that. I like the context and the story, so it's all good. And I also think this is a really important question that gets to the heart of why there is so much interest now in collaborative farming models. Farming is fun, it's satisfying work, it's delicious, and it's also often very lonely. I know that some of the hardest times I've had farming had nothing to do with the farm itself or how it was going. It was when in particular, one I remember is when we were still living off-grid, an hour from anything in southern Kentucky, and our firstborn was still very young, which limited Hannah's ability to work or to help me in the field. So there were many, many days at that period, whole weeks, in fact, where basically I was out in the field by myself for like 8 hours every single day. And at the time, because we didn't have a lot of access to electricity, I didn't have unlimited charge on my phone. So I was basically just out there with my thoughts, which are, as you have no doubt learned through this show, all over the place. When we moved closer to family and back on the grid and got employees and our kids became more interactive, a lot of that loneliness went away because I had more people around. And when I didn't, I had more electricity to charge my phone and listen to podcasts and music and all those things. But not all of that loneliness went away, not even close. There are simply times when I am by myself for very long stretches, and sometimes that's a welcomed experience, but it gets old. I definitely feel you, Carolyn. I'm sure a lot of farmers do. In fact, part of the impetus for starting this show was to just hang out with you all in audio form every day, to just give you a consistent break from the loneliness. Part of the reason that we started the Collaborative Farming podcast with host Jackson Roulette was to explore alternative models for people to provide more companionship and more support. Is the financial side of starting some sort of farm collaboration complicated and potentially messy? Yes, sure, absolutely. Is it worth it to not have to spend your time alone in a field, though? Also, probably yes. But on the more practical side, perhaps, maybe starting with a part-time employee or even some volunteers wouldn't hurt. Maybe you can find someone willing to do work trade, or maybe you have some extra space on your farm that another grower could utilize and start a separate business. That way, at least you have someone nearby to chat with all the I's dotted and T's crossed contractually, of course, so it doesn't become a stress. Or maybe you do allow someone else to buy into your business. Either way, farmer loneliness is definitely a thing. It's a thing I go through. It's a thing many of us do. Like any problem in farming, solving it requires a thoughtful plan. What are some ways you could bring people onto the farm that would be fair to them and provide you with some companionship? I don't know if there's an easy way to feel less lonely, to address that part of the question, any more than we can feel less cold without putting clothes on. The loneliness is a product of the environment, of simply being alone all day. Interestingly, loneliness is not something I or really anyone else talks about when preparing someone to start a farm, though perhaps it should be, i.e. you've got a good business plan, but how, we should ask, are you going to manage the loneliness? Because it's real. And I know the word epidemic gets thrown around way too much, but there is already a well-studied and wholly depressing epidemic of loneliness fueled largely by social media that I have considered for a segment in the future because it bums me out tremendously. For myself, and it sounds like you have this too, Carolyn, I've learned that the time I do have around people should be rich and fulfilling so that my time away from people, that is to say while farming, does not add to the inherent loneliness created by no longer communicating with people in my real life. I really worry about the long-term health effects of poor social relationships and loneliness on our future and that of our children, but that rant is for another time. Anyway, everyone's situation is different, and maybe it's helpful to know that you are not alone in the loneliness. Not at all. Thanks for the great question, Carolyn, and keep us updated if you find a solution that works for you. I would love to hear what you learn. All right, up next, Dan Brisebois continues our Seed Week, teaching us how to breed for what we need. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, so welcome back, Dan. Thanks again for joining me today. All week we have been celebrating the release of your new book, The Seed Farmer, which is available at no-tillgrowers.com, with a series of seed questions. And for today's seed question, I was wondering, what if I want to breed a specific type of seed for heat or cold tolerance, or whatever attribute is relevant to me? How would I go about that? Like, what are the steps? What am I looking for? How does that work?
All right. So this is a great question. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons to grow seed on your farm is that seed evolves with where it's grown and with how you select it. And at simplest, growing a crop to seed on your site and then harvesting it, you're going to be selecting the best plants for that area. So you're just part of a longer term evolution, no matter what, by growing seed on your farm. So if you're growing in hot conditions, you'll be selecting for hot conditions. If you're growing in cold conditions, you'll be selecting for cold conditions. So that's like the basic thing to think about. And then like and also like if you have 100 pepper plants and you taste each pepper plant or the fruit from each pepper plant, and you find that some are better and you save the seed from the more tasty ones, over time, they're going to get tastier. If you have some pepper plants that are a little bit earlier than the others and you only save seed from those, over time, you're going to wind up with earlier peppers. So the things that you do will make you have will adapt that plant to your climate and to your preferences. Now, to make it to do better, this works best when there's some diversity in the population, some genetic diversity already there, which means there's some plants that are better than others, or more adapted for those traits than others. And if you're growing something like tomatoes or peppers, which is a predominantly self-pollinating plant, what we call a selfer, these don't have as much diversity on their own. So if you grow 100 or 200 plants and you save the most like what you want, it'll take longer than if you were doing that with something like a crosser like onions or corn or a brassica green. But there's any variety also just has a limit to what is possible within it. But then the next thing to do, and this is where what I find really fun with growing seed, is if you take a couple different varieties of the same species, and you let them cross together. And so it could be if you're growing a brassica green, you could grow something like a Mizuna beside a Tokyo Bacana, and maybe beside a Tatsoi, and beside a Rapini. And if you let them cross up, so the flowers will go, if they go to flower and the flowers are there at the same time, the insects are going to bring pollen from one plant to the other, and you're going to get crosses. And then the next generation, so you'll see a bunch of diversity in terms of leaf shape and flavor, and they're all going to be edible. They're going to be fantastic for your salad mixes. You'll have things that nobody's ever seen before, but also there's going to be more genetic possibilities of adaptation to cold and heat. And so by creating a broader population with more genetic diversity, you can then select better for cold resistance, for hot heat resistance. So that's kind of taking it to the next level. And if you can select for that resistance to specific weather, and then you can like at first you probably want to select for that, and then over time you're going to select probably more for what the plant looks like. And you can get something fairly stable after 6-7 years like that if you want it to be stable, or you can select more for broad diversity. And then the another important thing is you want the traits that you're looking for to be tested in the year that you're selecting it. So if you want something to be adapted to the heat of the summer, but you have a particularly cold season, you're not going to be able to choose the best heat resistant ones. Or if you want to select something that overwinters well, you can't select that in the summer. So like if you wanted to if you wanted to grow spinach in your field that's just going to produce all winter long, you can't select them in the summer. So the best way to do it is to grow your spinach in the fall, and you see what survives the winter, and then the stuff that's the best through the winter, you let that go to seed, cross up, harvest those seeds, and the next year it's going to be more adapted to the winter. So that's a really important point.
And then are you just with that selection process? So are you just going through and like flagging the plants that are doing the best? And then how does that work?
There's flagging is one option. It depends how extreme the bad thing is that you're selecting against, because it might just be, did they survive? Because like if 90% of your population dies and 10% are left, then you know that those are more adapted. And that's kind of the best. That's when you make the biggest bounds in your selection, is when things are that extreme. And usually you'll see, so if one year you have 90% that's winter killed and you only have 10% that survives, the next year you're probably going to only see like 50 or 60% winter killed. Like you're going to make a really big increases at first. But if it's not as harsh as that, then going out, so especially if let's say you're talking about looking for the earliest fruit, in that case, if I'm looking for an earliest fruit in tomatoes or a zucchini, I'm going to keep an eye on the plants. And when I see those first fruit, I'm going to flag those plants, and then I'll know that those were the earliest. I probably don't want earliest to be the only thing I'm looking for. But by having the flag down, I'll know to keep an eye on those plants, and then maybe other things will come into consideration afterwards. Like especially yield is going to be a big one, maybe flavor. Um, so both are possible. I mean, and some of it too. Let's say you were working with lettuces, like let's say you're doing lettuce mix, and if you're harvesting with like a greens cutter, it's not going to work. But let's say you were harvesting by hand the individual heads for lettuce, not the whole head, but you have to be cutting above the growing point. But if you taste, or if you're looking at each, so you could look at each plant, and if some you really don't like, you can destroy those at some point. Or if you're tasting them, you can destroy the ones that you don't like. And well, after you've harvested, you put it into your harvest bin, and then the ones you don't want to keep, you eliminate them, and you're leaving the stuff that you like. And it'll be better the next generation.
Where would you get the seeds to start with? So what I mean is, like, let's say I want to breed a new kale that is cold hardy for Kentucky, right? Where do I go to get seed that I can start with that I feel comfortable using without, I don't know, violating a patent or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the patents. Like, there's not as most open pollinated varieties don't have patents on them. And if you're growing for your own use, let's not worry about patents in this conversation. Let's just go, where does the seed come from? I would start by, well, there's two parts to it. First, go and look at local or bioregional seed companies. So like Southern Exposure Seed Exchange would probably be the place that I would look in Kentucky. I'm guessing, I don't know, there's like So True Seeds. There's a couple other companies down there. I would go and look for what they have on offer. But the second thing is I would run trials. So like grow it or get some seeds from different sources. Read the description carefully, see what they promise in that, but then grow it on your farm. And if you grow 10 kales and one does so much better than the others, then that's a good starting point. And so that's where I'd get the seed.
So I know you don't want to talk about patents, and I think that's smart because it's very complicated. But like, if somebody is concerned with, like, how would they know, like, that they're just avoiding that potential problem? Like you said, just sticking with those bioregional producers or purveyors, companies. And then beyond that, like, you're not going to run into patent problems, generally speaking, right?
The smaller the seed company, the less likelihood that you're getting something that's patented. And the reason I don't want to get into the patents is that it's a little bit more complicated than just patents. There's like, at the basic level, and it depends. So if you're in the US, it's different than if you're in Canada, it's different than if you're elsewhere in the world. But to my understanding, and I'm going to really emphasize that, and I'm not a lawyer, there's in the US, there's sort of two groups of plants or two groups of protections to be aware of. One is called PVP, which is plant variety protection. And the other one are actual utility patents. And so with a PVP, and it'll often be listed in the description, PVP. Not always, but often. And a PVP is a 20-year, I guess, license or a 20-year. So a seed company will register their variety to have it PVP. So they pay a certain amount for that to register it. And then they have the exclusivity to distribute those seeds for 20 years, more or less. It's like 17 to 20 years. And then once that expires, then anybody can propagate that seed and distribute it. Now, there are some caveats. And to my understanding, with PVP, you can keep seed from PVP plants if you're using it on farm. And I think they call that brown bagging it. And you can use it to do in breeding projects to breed new things. And those new things you breed, I think if they're significantly different than the PVP, you could actually sell that new variety, but you couldn't keep the seed from a PVP plant and save it during the PVP period. That's the PVPs. And then utility patents are a bit trickier. And this is not the variety. It has to do with the genetic traits in it. And this will be so I don't know totally the status of Salanova right now, but like the Salanova lettuces, I think those little small leaves on a core, that's the trait that's patented. It's not the variety. It's the fact that the lettuce is like that. So you couldn't even breed other lettuces like that. And I know there are others in the market, so that's why I'm not 100% sure how that works out patent wise. But the varieties that have those traits, you can't keep the seed for your own farm use. You can't sell the seed for those. Now, so that I'm not advocating that people break these patents, but if you keep some of that seed for your own use, nobody's probably going to know about it. However, that's not an endorsement to do that. I guess the last thing in there, and it's something with Salanova and some other varieties, there's also trademarks in the actual variety name. So if it's so if the variety name is trademarked, you can't use that name. But if it's not patented or under PVP, you could probably keep the seed and rename it. I'm not 100% sure about there, but that's why I try to steer clear of these conversations.
No, I get it. I appreciate you indulging my journalistic side that couldn't let you get through it. So, yeah, no, I appreciate that, Dan. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you stopping by.
It's a pleasure, as usual.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that chat and this episode. You can pick up a copy of Dan's new book, The Seed Farmer, at no-tillgrowers.com. That helps to support our work. And you can check out his podcast as well by that same name. Just search for The Seed Farmer wherever you get podcasts, or follow the No-Till Growers Network wherever you get podcasts. Also, the Living Soil Handbook is available at no-tillgrowers.com. In case you're looking to take care of all your holiday purchases in one place. Otherwise, I'm going to end it there. I hope you all have a nice holiday tomorrow, those of you who are in the US. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Sign up over at patreon.com/no-till growers to support our work, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, let's see what we got. Chris Newlati. I think I got that right. Nadia E. Wesley Hall, and Lydia. This is I think this story took place in 1986 in a little place called Winston, Texas. These were the founding members of the local chess club. And anyway, you can imagine in 1986 in Winston, Texas, that the most popular thing was the football team, and the football team consistently won the state championship, and they were that's the big deal. But there was a class field trip, and they all in this story went to science museum, and at this science museum, an evil, some would say mad scientist, took over the science museum and trapped everybody and gave everybody a series of puzzles, and it ended up being that Chris, Nadia, Wesley, and Lydia were the ones that saved the day. You know, sometimes it takes the nerds, right? So great story, very uplifting, and just reminds you to remember the nerds. Yep. Otherwise, thanks for watching or listening. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody in the U.S. I will see you on Friday to kick off Turkey Sandwich Weekend, right? And yeah, we'll see you then. Bye.